I wanted to highlight that disconnection, that part of the reason that people read them as real is because they're disconnected from what it really looks like. And so what we see, like the pictures we see online are mostly augmented, like the pictures we see from NASA. They look at like old master paintings and apply compositions and colors that are familiar to us. And so I thought that was really interesting, that idea of that's what we think it actually looks like. We think if we were in a spaceship out in space, we would look out and see this galaxy, and that's what it would look like. It wouldn't look like that.
Authenticity is often present in strong, moving art. This ingredient is a given, but sometimes art can also be even more significant in feel. It can be universal. I can't always put my finger on how this occurs, but I can recognize it. The work feels bigger. It references far more than what is contained within its borders. Oregon-based artist Vanessa Marsh makes this kind of work. Her art is similar to photography, but on closer examination, it is not. Vanessa constructs much of her work using darkroom techniques, collage, drawing, and painting. Her varied images of landscapes, trees, and night constellations seem familiar, like a collective shared memory. They have a specificity, but remarkably, also a universality. Her work is beautifully varied, but all of it shares a common subject matter: light itself. To see more of Vanessa Marsh's moving art and find her social links, click on podcasts at art2life.com. Oh, and also for any listeners interested in improving the color in your art, download my free Color Tips PDF by going to colortipspdf.com. I think this is going to be really helpful. All right, join Vanessa and me now for this expansive conversation about constellations, human connection, and the nature of light. Welcome to Art2Life, a podcast for the creatively curious. My name is Nicholas Wilton, and each week I'll help you rediscover not just the art of your life, but the art in your life. Join me as we explore that perfect blue at twilight, the wild frontiers of art making, and the extraordinary joy of finding your way as you go. So Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for asking me.
So before we dive into your work, and I'm so excited to talk to you about it all, update me. You're in San Francisco, correct?
My husband and I moved up to Portland, Oregon, opposite. Yeah, about a year ago, just about a year ago. We wanted more space and more studio space. And so we moved up to Oregon.
Okay, great. But you were in Seattle and then you moved to San Francisco and then you're back up to the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, I grew up in Seattle and went to college up in Bellingham, Washington, and then moved down to San Francisco for graduate school in 2004.
Okay.
So I was just under 20 years in the Bay Area before we moved up to Oregon.
Okay, great. And for you guys listening, hop over to art2life.com and click on podcasts to see Vanessa's work, just so you can kind of picture it. And that's always helpful. But Vanessa, I saw your work and they were so familiar. Images were so familiar to me. And, they're sort of nature based. They've got, there's a realism to it, but they're stylized. It's not really real. It's almost like how I imagine or experience spacious wilderness, openness. There's a whole poetic thing you're doing. And I know that was informed. Can you just tie that into where you grew up? Because I know the Pacific Northwest, it feels like that.
Yeah. I think part of that is, I'm kind of honored to hear you say that, because that's so much like what I'm trying to do is create these like familiar places, but that you can't quite locate. Part of that is that I moved around a lot all over the West Coast when I was younger. And so I think my sense of self in terms of where I was connected was a little bit muddled. And so that comes out in my artwork, in that I'm sort of combining these different places that I've grown up with and experienced throughout my life. So you might see something like in the background, this top one that's like very Pacific Northwest feeling, but then next to a palm tree, next to something that feels like very California. And so, yeah, I think I'm always sort of trying to trying to connect back to one location or another that I'm not currently in. So it's like right now I'm excited about making more palm trees since I'm in Oregon.
Yes.
So it's like it's a way I think for me to connect with like landscapes that I remember connecting with and I remember experiencing.
Yeah, yeah. And as a child, did you grow up you were in Seattle as a young child?
We lived in Seattle till I was 11, and then we were in Oregon for 3 years and in California for a year, and then back up to the Pacific Northwest for high school. So just kind of all over, and then back to California for graduate school. So
Yeah.
I feel very much like I'm from the West Coast. It's hard for me to say like, oh, I'm from the Bay Area or from Seattle because, in one way or another, those places are unfamiliar to me.
Yeah.
Because I didn't experience the Bay Area as a child. There's unfamiliar elements to it, yet it's the place I've lived the longest in my life. And with Seattle, I go back and it's exciting. I'm like, oh, I recognize that and I recognize this area, but so much of it is different because I didn't live there for 20 years and didn't have reason to go back there very often.
I might not be making this up, but when I look at your work, it's almost like you're finding a universal place that you can reside, even though you're frantically moving. They're universal. They're big places that whether or not you're jumping around to LA or here or there, you're grounded in these, there's a consciousness, there's an expansiveness. Am I just making that up? Or is that, because when you say, I don't know where I am, the work is you're visualizing, you're putting into imagery a place that I know, like it seems way above LA and Seattle or,
Yeah.
This could be anywhere in the world. I mean, I could be anywhere in the world. I mean, is this a real thing for you? This sort of discombobulation of moving here and moving there? And maybe is your art an answer to that for you? I'm totally going out on a limb here. But it just suddenly occurred to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if anything, I think it's a way for me to feel connected to that universality, because I think we do experience, and even across time, I think like at the core of a lot of my work is the landscape and is like the cosmos, which is sort of like the astrological landscape that we all live in and that we all experience. And I think a lot about like our disconnect with that experience of this sort of sublime, the astrological sublime, and wanting to tap into that and kind of help people reconnect with that feeling you get, staring into a dark sky and seeing the stars and the feeling of our place in the universe and sort of that openness that comes from that, which can be kind of startling and scary, if you're not used to experiencing it. And so I kind of want to tap into that feeling. And reconnect with that feeling. If you think like it can actually feel kind of scary, we go way out in the country in a really dark night, and it can almost feel frightening, just how vast it is because we just never see it. Most of us live in the city, and so we might see Orion up there, sort of through the haze, but we don't really have that connection with the greater cosmos, which is ironic because we have like more knowledge of it than we've ever had before. And so it's sort of like there's no in between. We see these like Hubble space or now the James Webb telescope images, and they're just sort of so disconnected from what our experiences of the sky is, that it's beautiful, but it doesn't provoke that same sort of sublime, frightened, odd feeling that you get when you're just out in the country looking up at the Milky Way.
Yeah.
Whoa,
Yes.
We're really in this galaxy, in this, much greater space than what we normally experience in our daily lives.
I mean, I can be I really think of it like frantically rushing around doing to-do lists, and I'll come home and park the car and then realize, it's so quiet where I live. And then I'm walking to the house and then I look up and I just see all the stars are out and everything. And on the one hand, it's reassuring, but you feel so insignificant and not really like nothing you're really doing actually is that important. So it takes away the pressure that, okay, all right, this is just a dumb job interview, whether I get it or not, whatever the things are, you have to do. But then a bigger kind of question, if that isn't so important, which I don't really think it is, what is important? What does matter?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a juicy question to start asking yourself. It's a little intimidating, but also I think it's where your art is going. Like I think maybe there's some of that implied when we look at your work. These are not specific places. These are those places that invite that inquiry.
Yeah, or remind you of an experience that you've had, remind you of a dream or of an experience you had. And
yeah.
I mean, we all struggle with sort of the back and forth between the response to that feeling, because it can make you feel insignificant in a way that is sort of like, well, what's the point? Or
yes,
not to quote to quote Woody Allen, even though he's, not supposed to quote Woody Allen anymore, but like when he's a little kid and he's like, the world is expanding, like this is it. There's no reason to even go on. I relate to that in a funny way, but I think the other side of that is that it can make you realize that, that job interview, whatever it is that's stressing you out, all these little things that we try to do, like maybe aren't the most important thing, and actually trying to find like some space to appreciate the world around you is what's important, and just appreciating that moment and that insignificance. And that can be very kind of meditative and comforting in a weird way. That's like, what's important is that I live my best life and have good relationships. And,
right.
That's what's really important, not the, all the stuff.
And your thing, what you're, swimming in all the time is you're creating something that talks about this, right? I mean, how did you kind of come into this? Why do you think it holds for you so much interest? I'm
not sure. I mean, it's a complicated question, right? Because I'm sure it has something to do with just like my parents and their thoughts on how to live a good life.
What were those? I'm curious. Like, what was your family like? Because I get it,
Sure. That's complicated too.
Okay.
But I think my dad did try to live a life that he thought that it was important to enjoy yourself, that we're only here for a certain period of time and we are kind of insignificant. And so, it's important to do your best, but to have a sense of humor about things and to enjoy life and not try not to take too many things on that just are not pleasant for you. Which might be, sort of how I end up being an artist. It's like I don't have a super high tolerance for like a full-time job, So this is something that I found I can do, consistently, and that doesn't drive me crazy.
It's so funny because I talk to a lot of artists and you think, we all want to think it's like, well, the bolt of lightning came down and suddenly, my fingers, I started making this work, but it's never like that. I hear from artists and they're like, it seemed like all the guy artists I know were getting girls. So I figured I wanted to do this it's just like,
right. That's funny. Yeah.
But
well, yeah,
I get
you
it.
Could, like, I've put together slide presentations where it's like, I'm actually showing you like, okay, I made this work and then I made this work and then I made this work. And it's like, you can see, how one jumped to the next one, how one went to the next. And so, I think that's why I say it's complicated. It has a lot to do with bigger ideas, like we've been talking about, that aren't necessarily about art, but that are just about these big ideas of how we experience life and experience the world. But then it's also just about making and creating things and experimenting. And I enjoyed just that activity, outside of all the ideas. I just enjoy making things.
Yes.
And so that process of making and discovering like new ways of making, I think is probably the most exciting thing for me in my practice. And so it's like, as soon as I get comfortable with making something one way, I'm looking to take that sort of toolbox and translate it into something else. And that mindset is more just about creating and making.
Yes.
Than it is about like the big ideas.
Right. And what you portray with it, that your work has that feeling. Front end of this thing is you experimenting and trying new things. And when I first saw your work, Vanessa, and you guys listening, it was, I thought, oh my God, I wonder where this is. I wonder where these photos have been taken. And then I realized that this isn't really a place. This is a kind of coming together of, it's like a painting. It's made up, but it's realistic, but there's light. So let's dive into that a little bit. I now have read about it, but at first it seems so real to me, but it was off a little because it was more the feeling of a place that I had seen rather than the specific place. And I know you're using different kinds of processes to do that, but that's what's cool about your work. I just want to say that's what I love about your work. It looks like photography, but it is you in there with all kinds of different approaches and techniques and tools. So what is that? What is the basis of how you make these images?
Well, I was going to relate what you were saying back to that idea of like familiarity, and then also the idea of like our disconnection from the cosmos.
Yes, go there.
So I've been curious, like since I started creating these landscapes, which would have been like back in 2012 when I first started really, well, that's not even true. In grad school, the work related as well, kind of these made up landscapes. I wanted to do that. I wanted to come to a place where it wasn't quite recognizable if it was real or not. And especially with the cosmos images, the images that involve the stars, I wanted to highlight that disconnection, that part of the reason that people read them as real is because they're disconnected from what it really looks like. And so what we see, like the pictures we see online are mostly augmented, like the pictures we see from NASA. They look at like old master paintings and apply compositions and colors that are familiar to us, to invisible gases. And so I thought that was really interesting, that idea of that's what we think it actually looks like. We think if we were in a spaceship out in space, we would look out and see this galaxy, and that's what it would look like. It wouldn't look like that.
Well, wait, you mean what we're seeing, those colorful starry images, those are enhanced?
They apply color to invisible gases.
Why?
Not in all cases, but in most cases, because we can't see it, because that's what makes it so grand. That's what makes it so amazing looking, because a lot of those nebulas are gases that we couldn't see with a naked eye. And so it's through filters and through photography and through we're going to apply this color to this gas.
Wow.
And you can look back at like old master paintings and see the relationship, see how the colors and the way you can also think of like they frame it compositionally. We're seeing a composition. There's no ground, there's no landscape. So that could be framed any way they chose, but they choose to frame it in a way that is familiar to us.
Right.
That we'll relate to.
Yeah.
That relates to landscape.
Well, right. That relates to planet Earth, that generally speaking, horizontal feels like the Earth. We walk around on a planet. There's gravity. And yeah, it's interesting. It's like a translation for Earthlings. I get that. And it's so interesting. I never knew.
Right. We consume these things as like, that's what it looks like. And even with the Milky Way, I think we're so disconnected from what that actually looks like if there was no light pollution, that I can apply purples and yellows and all these crazy colors to it. And people will think that I went out into the countryside and took this picture. But that's because they're not aware of what it would actually look like to them, because we're just so disconnected from it, which I find that is fascinating, because it's the first time in human history that we've been so disconnected from it. Like before, just to the early 1900s, and we were still just way more connected in our daily lives to that rotation and to those stars and to the way that the planet was moving through the cosmos. It had our farming and navigation and the way we understood time was all connected to that. And now it's like totally disconnected as far as the way we experience it.
Yeah. And it's like the cosmos has an Instagram account and they're just posting daily, like, check this out, and we're all kind of, we're all just drinking this up, thinking that's real. I mean, I've never, it's curious because I look at those celestial photos and it never looks that way to me. So you're absolutely right. I never see anything remotely like that, but I just figured that I wasn't in the right place. I never thought that someone was enhancing it for me, which is, so the terra firma, like we're not actually looking at the thing. And so what is the thing? But I guess you have to do that to package it or something.
Yeah. And I mean, if you think about it, you can go like even more deep into that. Like even like color is just a process that happens in our brain.
Right.
It's just how the light comes through our eyes and how we process that information. That's how we experience color, which seems like this very solid thing, but it's like actually just a biological occurrence, right? It's not,
Yes.
it's not a real,
Right.
real thing.
Yes. And we're all experiencing it. We can't even tell, but everyone's got a different version of the story, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and I think from what I understand, like it's within humans, you know, it's probably fairly consistent, you know, the way we're experiencing it, but unless you're colorblind or something like that. But, you know, you certainly could say like dogs or cats or any animals experiencing it very differently than we are.
You're making these images about light and space. You know, you're using exposure and light and sun. You're using the stuff, the subject matter, to make the thing about the subject matter. Does that make sense? Find that so fascinating.
Yeah.
So maybe let everyone know, like, what is some of the ways that you're working. You know, you're not like rendering with a paintbrush this imaginary.
Well, I am to some degree. The color falling work, like those are, I create paintings using transparent inks on clear mylar, and they're as big as the piece. So if I'm making a 30 by 60 photograph, I'm using a 30 by 60 painting on clear mylar as well. It gets laid directly onto the piece of paper to make the print.
Oh, wow.
And that painting acts like a negative. So where I want blue, I'll paint orange. And the light shines through the orange and reacts with the chemicals in the paper and creates blue, the color blue. So just like when you see a negative, it's like the opposite colors of what will end up on your print, your photograph. And these big paintings like act like a negative.
This is film that when exposed to light, it reacts, right? I mean, is that what we're talking about? Or, I mean, what is the negative? I don't understand how you're getting that.
Well, it's a big piece of acetate, just clear plastic.
Right.
And then I paint onto that piece of clear plastic the opposite colors that I want to have in the print. And it's transparent. And so if I paint transparent orange, a kind of a puddle of transparent orange onto this big piece of clear mylar, and then I lay that down on the photographic paper in the darkroom and expose it to light, the photographic paper, the light coming through the orange will create blue on the photographic paper. So then when I put the print through the processor, it comes out and it's where the light doesn't hit it is white. So it's like black, little specks of black paint that prevent the light from hitting the paper.
Right.
And then where it's black is where the light hit the paper. And then where the light hit the paper through the orange transparent ink will be blue.
Because you're filtering out the orange. Is that right? Wow.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think that is correct. Sorry.
No, I mean, I've never even heard of this. So
how negative.
I mean, I get it that you're breaking up the light spectrum. I mean, I've always thought it's either on or off. Like you can use those light sensitive exposure paper. I don't know what you call it, but if you let light in, it goes black, right? And if you don't, the paper stays white. But what you're doing is you're putting on color that's transparent. So as the light, the full spectrum light goes through, it somehow blocks those colors, so you get more of the other colors, and it's the complement actually. Wow.
Yeah, and that's the same way that just a color negative works, like that you get with film. So if you take a photograph with color negative film, you essentially get a little square of film that's that functions that way, that functions as filtering out the light in different areas to create. Does that make sense? I am not verbalizing it correctly. I should have looked at my photography book before. So
I think I just don't know. I just don't know about this. So amazing. So you're painting in reverse or negative or opposite, and wow. And you're finished. You're making a print, right? You're making a print, and you're using paint on Mylar to change that print. But can you do multiple passes on that print?
No.
Okay.
No, and the color darkroom is super sensitive. Like it is pitch black. So that paper is super sensitive to light. Like it's not like in a black and white darkroom where you can have red lights on. Black and white paper and film doesn't react to the red light. But in the color darkroom, it reacts to all light, all colors, the whole spectrum. So you have to be in like total darkness. And so, if you can imagine me like trying to unroll paintings onto paper and stuff, it's like
Oh my God.
Important, you know the room pretty well before you go into
So
it. But
yeah, like, okay, so you're doing these celestial kind of, you know how light comes from stars for, the light we're looking at now, and it's coming through and it arrives here, and you're sitting there, in your Boy Scout lecture or whatever, where you get this information that the light has been traveling so many years through the universe, and the star you're seeing, it might not even be there, but we're still getting the light, and all that whole light years away. And oh my God. So there's this idea of the universe and stars and light moving through. And this is what you're doing, in a sense. Like, the light is moving through, like you're making art about this place that has that. You're in the total, it's like you're an astronaut in complete darkness. You're using light. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's not like you're doing this to make really cute puppy paintings. You're using all this stuff to create objects that talk about that. I mean, God, and to picture you, in the dark, utterly in the dark. I mean, who works like that? That's so, God, that's so spiritual. But I mean, wow. Right. Like, just turn off all the lights and paint. I mean, that's like a really powerful experience. I mean, you're just left with yourself. I mean, don't you think? Or maybe it's just I'm not a photographer, but
yeah, I mean, I have it all really mapped out. So it's not in that element of the process is like has to be so controlled or you just don't get a good result. And so I have a template and I have, things I can feel for. So it's like, oh, I know that's the edge. And I know that. So it's sort of like in printmaking, if you've ever done printmaking or silk screening, if you're going to do the same print over and over again, you sort of have a template set up so that whatever it is that you're printing onto, each one goes in exactly the same spot. And so I have a similar sort of template laid out so I can, every time I lay down the painting and the paper and everything, I can feel around and understand that it's all where it's supposed to be.
Yes, but nonetheless, part of your practice is going into complete darkness. I mean, I remember I went to San Quentin, the island in the San Francisco Bay that has used to be a prison, and part of the tour is you can, if you want, you can go into solitary confinement. Alcatraz, right? I'm sorry. Yeah. And that's right. San Quentin. No, right. Alcatraz Island.
Still a prison.
Still a prison. And they close the door and you do this and it's utter darkness. And I mean, I never forgot that experience. So I love that you're a visual artist working in the dark as part of your practice. I think that's pretty amazing. And your subject matter is the sky and darkness and consciousness, and
that kind of speaks to how things evolve. I've started saying in the past few years, like that I work with light and I make work about light. But it took me a little while to figure that out. It was like I was making work about time and memory and these kind of common shared experiences and common reference points. And then, when I started working on the lumen prints, I realized like, well, this is what you were saying. Like, I'm creating work about something and I'm using that something to create the work.
Yes.
And that's light, So it's like the work is about sunlight and I'm using the sunlight to make it. So it's like a partnership more, or collaboration or something. And I see like over the course of my career, like that it's kind of always been about light.
Yeah.
So that's been an interesting thing. It's like, I don't necessarily consider myself like a photographer.
No.
Because a lot of photographers like, couldn't pick up a camera and go shoot something.
Yeah.
I kind of wish I had that skill, but I don't have the skill, or I did never have the aptitude to, pick up a camera and go shoot a wedding or go shoot portraits of people. So in a way, I'm not really a straight photographer. I don't take pictures of things.
Yeah.
And so I fall in this sort of like no man's land in a little bit.
Right. But like those Hubble, the photographs that we see of space that are put out by NASA or whatever, we think we're looking at something. Like, we think we're familiar with the photography. We're familiar with a photo, at which your work feels like the photography. So we feel like we're on terra firma, but there's something more. And literally that was my experience. I was like, oh, wow. And then they're deeper. There's more to them. But they're accessible, I think, because we are all comfortable with, we know what a photo is, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And I appreciate that. And I think maybe the familiarity, the sense of familiarity might be like increased in it being a photographic medium because you expect it to be something like when you look at a painting, you expect there to be some element of imagination. Even if you're looking at some really hyper realistic painting, it's more like, wow, it's amazing how they made this not real thing look so real.
Yeah.
But with photography, you go into it assuming that it's a capture of a moment.
Right.
That was real.
Right. So on some of the ones that are more landscape oriented, for example, you're using masking to create mountain ranges or things that feel like mountain ranges. How are you sourcing that? Is this all made up for you, or are they based on real places or stylized, and what makes you choose them?
Yeah, it depends on the series. Most of the work, like all the series have, well, I guess if you go way back to a body of work called Constellation, which is these black and white landscapes with sort of little figures moving through the space, those were just entirely made up. There was nothing within those images that was like based on a real landscape. But then when I moved into the next body of work, which was Everywhere All at Once, I started thinking about that idea of like my different experiences on the West Coast and wanting to create spaces that were like hybrids of all those different landscapes and sort of layering those different places together.
Yes.
And so then it became more like where I take reference shots and then I make drawings. So I was going to say, Falling has the paintings, and then Everywhere All at Once has drawings that I create. So that's how you get the palm tree and the trees, is a drawing in black ink on clear Mylar. And so those drawings tend to be based on something real, and they're stylized and they're layered together with different things or different places. But they do start to be based on a specific palm tree that I took a reference shot of, or a specific, some flags over a gas station that I took a reference shot of.
Yes.
And then moving into the lumens, those are all based on mountain ranges in the Western United States. And so I'm taking, say, like the Brothers, which you can like see from the Seattle waterfront. It's this like these very prominent peaks in the Olympic range that you can see from Seattle. I take those peaks and like layer them with other places, other mountain ranges in the West Coast. So still kind of creating these hybrid locations, but trying to ground the images a little bit more in something that is real, and then the titles reference that as well. So it's like the Brothers from Sunset Bay or whatever the title ends up being, which is a real reference to one of the mountains in the image, but not all of them. And like usually sort of a made up location where you're looking at it from might not be a location where you could actually see them from.
Can you speak to your use of silhouette? And one thing that's beautiful about your work is it's so reduced. And I struggle with this in my own work, but you use it so effectively. I mean, this idea that less is more here. I mean, those silhouettes of palm trees and what you're including and what you're not. How did you learn to reduce things? Is that just natural for you? You know what I mean? It's like they're universal because it's like an icon, but it's more than that. I feel like I'm in a real place, but it's like a optimized place that, I recognize this, but you've reduced it down so much. How do you think about reduction in your work?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if I've thought about it specifically in terms of like conceptually why. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is kind of not satisfying, and that's that it's what I'm good at. So sometimes I find in our practices, like we try to like push ourselves into something because it's uncomfortable, and sometimes that's great, but sometimes you don't necessarily have a great aptitude for it. Like I love photography, but I know I'm not good at shooting portraits. I think using that silhouette is like something I've become skilled at, and trying to create something that was like more fleshed out or had more dimensionality within that plane, like doesn't come naturally to me. But whereas the silhouettes and the layering of silhouettes and creating depth from that like comes very naturally to me. And I look out at the landscape, and even before I worked like this, I think it would experience the landscape that way, as these like planes of layers. And part of that is growing up in Seattle and also in the Bay Area, because you get this sort of fog or this moisture in the air that creates these what look like planes of landscape receding.
Yes.
And so I was always just very drawn to that and how it looked, and thinking about tectonic plates and these like movements of the earth and the way the earth moves, and it all just kind of made sense to me to break it down into these like planes of space.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is just, I'm looking at the flags that are draped across a night sky, very simple, or just telephone wires going across the night sky. My mind fills in all the detail. You've given me just enough. So that's sort of one of those things. It's like you can tell a whole story in shadow puppetry. They're just basically just so cool. You must love that, by the way.
Oh yeah, like give me William Kentridge any day.
Right. Like that whole like wow,
shadows and silhouettes.
Oh my god! But the planes idea, like in all the work, I guess it was everywhere all at once. There's always this. Okay, here you are, plane, and then there's the out there plane. I'm very aware, and that's just like gajillion stars. Your skies are the reminder that, okay, you can be here, but we're also there at the same time. You're actually in both places. And there's definitely a layering, which I think is it's a layering of consciousness in a way, like your parents or your father, what you're talking about, there was a level of awareness that he had about, he wasn't just like raising a family and, paying the mortgage. He was like, hey, wait a second. This is temporary, whatever, So that's really, I don't know, I just think that's really interesting, that how you see in planes, because that's what the work really feels like. And then you get that, I guess maybe it's because of the way the exposure happens. There's the softness there. It feels atmospheric, it's like using wax in painting or light transfers. There's a softness that comes. It's not applied with a paintbrush, or it just feels sort of otherworldly, or processes happen to it. It's like it's like a lifesaver on the street that's melted. There's something that's happened to it that makes it part. There's other forces at play, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, and then something that just came to mind, a little tangential, but I also think of like my mom. When I was a kid, my mom went back to school for graphic design. And this was sort of like right when computers came into that arena. So she did a little bit on computers, but a lot of it was just physical mock-ups. And a lot of those things are layered because they have to be prepared for like four color printing.
Yes.
And so there was a lot of that just around her studio. I think the materials I use like very much come from me being 8 years old and like watching my mom create these like mock-ups for print for graphic design that were all layered, these layers of things.
Yes.
And so seeing the depth, like seeing how that could create depth.
Yes.
And I really like remember being interested in that and looking at those things in my mom's studio.
Yeah. And I want it to be clear for people because it took me a while to get my head around, and we've touched upon it a little bit. Most of your work, you're either way, you're starting with drawings or whatever, but you're exposing light sensitive print paper and using masking and layering things and then using light, right? Like that's sort of, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And like burning and dodging techniques, if you're familiar with that term, it's essentially where as you're making the exposure, you're blocking some of the light. And so a lot of that atmospheric, especially in the falling work, when you see the mountains and it sort of seems atmospheric and the gradation, it's because I'm like waving a huge piece of cardboard like over the print as it's being exposed so that the light isn't hitting the bottom as much as it is the top portion. So you end up with this a gradation of light. So I would say it's like a combination of these masking techniques, different masking and burning and dodging techniques. How I let the light hit the paper.
I love it. And so as we're kind of getting near the end here, I just wanted, what's coming up for you that's exciting? Like, what are you challenged by and what are you hoping to overcome in coming up here in the next year?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one thing that's a little off topic is that I have a big public art project that's about to be unveiled in the city of San Lorenzo, which is like unincorporated Alameda County near Hayward. And so that's been a huge project, and I'm super excited that that is coming to a close and finishing up and getting installed.
And what is, can you just give us the quick overview of what is the art look like that you've been commissioned to do?
Yeah, so it's been really a fascinating project because it's taking these same ways of using silhouettes and creating landscapes, but then applying it in a totally different way. So there's like 7 sites for sandblasting. So I created like 48 different designs for the sandblasting, all like silhouettes of birds and plant life. And then there are, I believe, 7 locations for street banners, and then 7 utility boxes. Wow. And so I took sort of flora and fauna that's familiar to the area and created like silhouetted images with color gradations for the different areas. Wow. So that's been a huge thing, but that's exciting for that to be coming to a close. And it really was like sort of this mixture of my practice and then like design and what I saw my mom doing as a kid, as a designer, because I essentially had a client that I needed to satisfy their needs, which is different than just creating work in your studio.
But interestingly enough, sandblasting kind of relates. It's not light, it's sand being blasted, and you're dodging and exposing and masking. And, like, oh my God, Vanessa, I could just see so many sculptures of your work, right? Yeah, it's similar.
Yeah, so that was super exciting. And then I have a residency coming up at Penland School of Crafts, which is in North Carolina, and that's for 2 weeks in January. And so I'm just trying to get kind of front load all this stuff so I have things that are sort of halfway done when I get there, so that I can spend those 2 weeks just like really hunker down and try to get as much work done as possible in those times. And I've been working on a new series of wet plate collodion tintypes, if you know tintypes, with a similar process, drawings in the darkroom. And so I'm hoping to work on those there and kind of expand that practice. Right. So those are the things I'm excited about.
Oh, that's so great. And you have such you just feel really healthily optimistic and just doing the work. And even I'm sure you've
got me on a good day.
Yeah. Okay. But how do you keep this going, and just your approach and your attitude? And do you struggle with that? And like, how do you stay in it? And I know this is a question that, everyone on this call is, we're all thinking about it. But when I meet somebody it just all fits together. It looks so beautiful how it all fits. Your life, where you came from, it makes sense, and it feels comforting. It must be, but
that's comforting to hear that. Yeah. It doesn't always feel that
way.
I mean, it's been a tumultuous year, to say the least, with moving and some other stuff. But I think, like, in terms of like keeping the work going, it kind of comes back to this. A lot of people say this, and across different career paths as well. But it's practice. It's I was thinking last night about how even when I'm super busy, I try to go into my calendar and put in my calendar like expose prints. I'll look at the weather app and see, it's going to be sunny Thursday afternoon. I need to make sure that I reserve that afternoon to make prints. So it's, even if it's super busy, it's like it's there in my calendar and I know not to put anything else there. And then I have that time to do it and focus on it.
It just hit me how, you're looking at your calendar for sun and using that in your art. So now you are actually like, a farmer. I mean, you're right. The stand-in for all of it. You're so connected to, like, it's cloudy, it's sunny. And I mean, like, it's so
especially
interesting.
Especially since moving to Oregon, because it's like, we've had this really late summer. It's been super sunny, but I haven't had a chance to do much. And now on Friday, it's supposed to start raining, and it's just insane. It's like sunny, and then it's just like rain for days and days and days. Right. So I have to think about it more up here, because I'm going to have months where there isn't any intense sun to use.
But Vanessa, like, for the rest of us, it's like, okay, it's going to be beautiful on Thursday. I am not going to the studio on that day. I am taking that day off. I mean, you get that, right? Like, you're orbiting. Right. I mean, you're working in the dark. You're working when it's sunny. I mean, you're an enigma. And right. So hilarious.
Well, I think I'm lucky. Like I have a husband who's also an artist. And so
Oh, wow.
that I think helps because he understands, we understand each other that we need to make our studio practice a priority sometimes. And
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. Not necessarily that your partner's another artist, but that they understand, they understand that like having an art practice can seem selfish, because you just need to spend all this time by yourself and you need to do this thing that doesn't really involve anyone else. But if you're with someone who understands that, then it makes it easier.
And can you just give us the quick overview of we'll share links if you want of his work
Sure.
What's his name and what kind of work is he making? I'm just curious how the two of you kind of fit.
Yeah, well, his name's Adam Gerlach, Gerlach.
Okay. And we'll have links, you guys, in the show notes. Okay.
He takes photographs with a camera, but also works with the night sky. And
oh my God.
His big project right now is he's been taking multiple trips down to, I think it's Inyo National Forest where the Bristol cone pines are, and taking these really beautiful, essentially portraits of these trees at night. And he uses a technique called light painting. So it's really long exposure and he's actually in the frame while the exposure is happening, but he's moving around really quickly.
Illuminating parts of it. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah. Very cool. Wow. What a great thing. So I imagine your date nights are going out to the country and having night picnics or something.
No.
Okay.
He's no fun to go to the country with because he just troops off with his camera and never see him. Like we'll go on like a romantic vacation and we don't have dinner till midnight because he's out shooting photographs and
Wow.
but that's okay.
Yeah. No, I love it. Wow. Yeah. Well, listen, Vanessa, it's just been really lovely to catch up with you. And
you too. It was so nice to meet you.
People have to see your work in person, and we'll provide links, of course, to any shows and all your social links. But what's coming up, I guess, is there going to be an unveiling when you're open, this big commission piece?
Yeah. Well, the unveiling should happen in early December. I mean, anyone can go now to Hesperian Boulevard in San Lorenzo and see in progress what's happening there because it is just a public street. And then the official unveiling or ribbon cutting, they're calling it, is I think on December 3rd. And so I'll be down in the Bay Area for a couple days for that. Yeah. And then Dolby Chadwick Gallery in San Francisco always has they have a pretty big selection of my work there. So, and they're very friendly group. And yes, you can go in and they're happy to pull work out and show people, even if you're not looking to purchase anything, they're happy to have a conversation and show work. And
All right. Well, listen, again, thank you so much. It's really been fun.
Yeah, you too. It was really a pleasure.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Art2Life show. If you enjoyed the podcast, please help me get the word out by sharing it with your friends on Instagram at Art2Life_world. The recording of this and all episodes, along with a place to leave comments, see additional photos, and discover a whole new approach to making art, can be found by going to Art2Lifepodcast.com. And secondly, if you could leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on today, I would super appreciate it. It makes a big difference. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my artist list, every Sunday morning I send out a video blog all about art making. Go to Art2Lifepodcast.com to sign up. And all these links are in the show notes, of course. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.